Hey everyone, welcome. I'm Naomi, and today I want to talk to you about using your core muscles more effectively. And more importantly, I want to talk to you about some of the mistakes that you might be making, or just some of the things that you might be doing or thinking about when it comes to engaging the muscles of your core that might be making your actions, those poses, those exercises a little bit less effective and a little bit less satisfying in the long run. Okay, because really at the end of the day, I think that, working these muscles, working your core, your abs, your center, however you want to look at it, is a really powerful practice. It can be really fun, and it can be incredibly useful when it comes to the overall health of your entire body. So knowing how to engage your core muscles more effectively, more efficiently, and in some ways more creatively is going to benefit you in every part of your life. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so number one, and this is actually, I think, the most important. Number one is that your core is more than just your abs. Okay, I think we tend to have this very limited view of what the core is. Your core is more than your abs. So it's not just, and also beyond that, those core muscles have three parts. Okay, but I'll get there in a sec, right? Your core really is everywhere from about your shoulders down to your pelvis, down to your pelvic floor. Okay, that is your core. And the reason that I want to use this whole area as the definition of what your core is mostly because if you exclude your shoulders and your hips, your hip flexors, your pelvic floor from the dialogue when it comes to engaging these muscles, then you're not going to be using every part of your body in the most effective way. Okay, so for example, if you ignore the fact that your hip flexors are a part of your core, and one of the most common things that you hear in yoga class, particularly in a pose like Navasana, this one, boat pose, is, well, if you're feeling it in your hip flexors, you're doing it wrong. Okay, that is not true. If you're feeling it in your hip flexors, it's very likely because those muscles are stronger. So they're just doing the work for you. Okay, and eventually your core will get stronger. You just have to figure out how to get there, and there are a lot of ways to get there. I can show you how, but that's a video for another time. And the same thing with your shoulders, right? If you exclude your shoulders and your chest from the narrative, and you pretend that your core is like from here to here, you are missing out on some really imperative alignment support in your upper body. Okay, so really important to remember that your core is from right about at shoulder height down to your pelvic floor, and every part of that is essential to creating a stronger, more stable center. Okay, now sort of part 1B of that, so that was 1A. 1B is that you have more than one core muscle. We tend to think of the core as rectus abdominis, and rectus abdominis is, that big long muscle that creates the six pack, or in the case of, like Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, like the 10 pack. Okay. We tend to think of the rectus abdominis as the only core muscle that has any value. Okay, it doesn't. It's actually the most superficial of all of the core muscles. Okay, so your rectus abdominis, that one, it's great, it's good to work, it's fun to work, it's super important, but it's not the only one, right? It's not the only one that you have, and ultimately, it's the one that's on the surface. So it's the one that looks really cool if you engage it, but it's not doing some of the deeper work of supporting and sustaining your body in a more powerful way. So you have two other core muscles that I think are really important to know about. You have your transverse abdominals, which are the deepest ones, and they kind of run sort of on the diagonal. It's like you can feel your transverse abdominal muscles, like you can think of it as let's say you're trying to pull a coat on around your body and you pull it on and you're tightening. Those are your transverse abdominal muscles working, okay? And those are really useful in so many ways, right? We just don't tend to access them very much. Okay, now the other group of muscles are your obliques, and the obliques are in around the same place, but your obliques are more like when you do side bending here, that's when you're feeling the obliques, generally speaking, that's when they're stretching or strengthening depending on what you're doing. Okay, so three groups of muscles that are primary in your abdominal region: your rectus abdominis, which is the six-pack abs, your obliques, which are one layer lower, and then the transverse abdominals, which are the ones where it's like you're putting on a coat. okay? So it's really important to access all three of them, not just the superficial ones on the outside, okay? So that's sort of like 1A, 1B, all right, if we're talking core work. All right, and I think super duper important. All right, number two is that when it comes to engaging your core, it's really important not so much to just think about your core muscles, but to think about your pelvis and neutral pelvis. Okay, so here's what I mean. The tendency will be, and I'm going to do this kneeling so you can see, the tendency in core work is to overtuck the tailbone, right? Which in a lot of ways usually flattens your low back against the floor. Okay, it kind of flattens your back. And this is usually considered to be, well, this is how you engage your core. Okay, so you will definitely feel your core engage when you do that, but you're also cutting off some of the support in your low back, you're cutting off some of the support in the front of your thighs. What's much more important is to have a neutral pelvis. So I'm just going to lift my shirt so you can see a little better. Yes, I'm pregnant, so I am still tilting forward. Neutral pelvis is not this. This is an over tilt, right? I'm tilting forward. Neutral pelvis is when I bring the top of my pelvis back, bottom of my pelvis down. It's not a tuck. See, this is more of like a tucking of my tailbone. That's different, okay? Thigh bones go way forward, belly pushes forward, and I can definitely feel like my lower abdominal muscles working and my butt squeezing, but I don't really feel anything higher up than that. Okay, so when you create a neutral pelvis, you're going to create a little bit more security in your core, a lot more stability in your core, and you can engage it more uniformly than just sort of like a tightening, right? Remember that when it comes to core work, and this is sort of the next one, so we'll get into this for the third, okay? So number 3 is this. When it comes to core work, you're not just looking for like a tight core. You're actually looking for a core that has mobility. Right? So a strong core is not one that's like rigid and hard. A strong core is one that is stable. Okay? Strong core is also mobile. Okay? And think of it this way, right? If you've ever seen like those bodybuilders at the gym, okay, like, you know, the ones that are like, you know, super massive and like every muscle is, you know, huge, and like I'm not, you know, like there's a spectrum, okay? But if you've ever seen most of those guys, because it's a lot of men, if you've ever seen them try to run like a mile, they can't, right? And it's because they're creating this rigidity in their body instead of a fluidity, okay? You want your muscles to not only be strong, but supple, right? You want them to have as much movement as they have strength, okay? So, you know, number 3 is really to think of your core as having different elements, right? You want a strong core, right? Meaning it can bear load, right? It can hold things, meaning you, okay? And maybe other things if, you know, you're going for stronger stuff, like holding kids, holding like heavy, you know, bags, that kind of thing. But a strong, you know, you want a strong core, you want a stable core, right? One that's like supportive, like if you get thrown out of balance, you can pull back to that stability. That's a stable core. And then one that moves freely, okay? So you want all 3 of those things, right? Strength, stability, and movement, okay? Not just tightness and rigidity, okay? So that's number 3, all right? That's number 3, okay? Number 4, and I think this is actually really important. Number 4 is that we have a tendency to rely on our limbs to do a lot of the work for us, which can result in not core work, but actually like head and neck work. So it's like doing sit-ups like this, right? Or doing like, you know, leg lifts and rounding back and sort of using that idea of momentum to pull us into core work. Again, I'm going to go back to that concept of neutral core and neutral shoulders, right? When you're rounding in, that's only one direction that your core is working. It's not really stable in all directions, right? So if you're using your limbs to move you, you know, another really good example, and what this is sort of going back to neutral core, is like, you know, this pose where, you know, you've got one leg back and the other forward. This is a very common core pose. If you've got that really big arch that you're back and you're just stretching your arms and legs, that's not really going to give you the support you need. But if your pelvis is neutral and you're stretching out, that's going to create a lot more support. So again, you know, it's sort of going back to number 2, the idea of a neutral pelvis, but it's also the reminder that, you know, if you move too much with your limbs, you're not going to have as much core support or stability, right? It's just, you know, like all this stuff in the external, okay? So that's number 4. Number 5 is that sit-ups are not the gold standard when it comes to core strength or stability or support. Okay, sit-ups are boring. Okay, also, they're not the only thing that you can do to engage your core, and they're not even the best thing, right? Sit-ups are actually fairly limited, okay? So just because, so like one of the things that comes up a lot for my husband who's in the Air Force, is in the PT test, right? The physical training test. They've got to do it like once a year to prove that they are in good physical condition to be active duty military, okay? And there's like there are different sort of levels at, which you are either at the peak, physical fitness for your age, like a healthy range, or like, you're just getting by, or it's unsatisfactory. So the idea is for certain people, you're supposed to be able to do like 60 sit-ups in 60 seconds. Okay, well, that's impressive, but that's not everything, right? Like that's rectus abdominis more than anything. It's not your entire core. And so it's a very limited perception of what your core is capable of. So if you're only doing sit-ups, I highly recommend you to look to our next one, number 5, which is variety is the spice of your core life. Okay, so if you are not doing a diverse range of work in your core, then you're not challenging your body to its full capacity. Okay, so what that means is it's not just doing sit-ups, it's not just doing planks, it's not just doing, boat pose, that pose that I showed earlier, right? All 3 of those are great, but they're not the only things that you can do to engage your core. And if those are the only things you're doing, it's going to be really limited and you're going to plateau, right? You're never actually going to be able to go forward, and it's not really building up to strength. It's sort of giving you sort of this like steady line to follow, right? That's not increasing. Okay, so variety is the spice of your core life. Keep things interesting for your core. Okay, and the last one that I think is really important to talk about is one that comes up a lot, and it's just going to go back to neutral core again, which is pressing your low back into the floor is not actually going to give you what you need when it comes to core work. Okay, now this might be a really controversial statement, but one of the things you hear most often, particularly in the fitness world, a little bit less in yoga, but it'll come up a lot, is the idea that if you press your low back into the floor, that's going to activate your abs. It's like the same idea of like sucking your belly in, okay? That'll engage your abs for like a few seconds, but it's temporary, right? Like it's sort of this sort of quick fix. Okay, again, what you're after is more of a neutral pelvis, right? If you are forcefully pushing your low back into the floor, you're actually taking your body a little bit out of alignment, like optimal alignment. Okay, now your body can handle all kinds of things. So it's not to say that pushing your low back into the floor is a bad thing or something you shouldn't do. It's just that that's not the only way to engage your core. And if that's the only solution that you're using to engage your core muscles, it's going to be limited. All right, so instead of thinking of it as I have to press my low back into the floor, really think of it more as like, can I lift my low back a little bit? Can I find more of a neutral pelvis and actually feel more? Right? Like that's another really, really, really big one. Okay, is paying attention to where you're feeling it. If you're only feeling it in your low back because you're pushing your low back into the floor, like that's telling you something. Okay, so keep in mind, pushing your low back into the floor, sucking your belly in, those are things you can do to engage your core. They're just temporary, right? They're not permanent. You can't suck your belly in all the time to engage your core everywhere you go, right? Neutral pelvis, though, that you can sort of work on to give your body a little bit more of that, optimal alignment. Okay, so I think those are 6. I think I gave you 6, ways to really rethink the way that you engage your core so that you are supporting yourself in a more effective, more satisfying, and honestly more productive way when it comes to engaging your center so that you are growing your capacity instead of plateauing. Okay, and this applies to not only being on your yoga mat, but this applies to pretty much every aspect of fitness that you can find. So, all that said, if you want to learn more about how to engage your core, I have a really awesome series called Yoga for a Healthy Core. It is 5 weeks, 2 videos every week with a really creative approach to core work that's really fun, really interesting, really out of the box when it comes to core work, and will give you a lot of what we talked about in this video to help support you in creating more support, more stability, more strength, and more dynamic movement in your core so that your core is healthier in general so that you can do more with it. And so instead of plateauing, you're growing your capacity. Okay, so yoga for a healthy core, 5 weeks, 2 videos every week. It's 11 videos because you get a bonus video, which is really awesome. And it's going to give you some really fantastic exercises, all less than 10 minutes long, so that you can do these every single day. If you want access to this program, Yoga for a Healthy Core, check the description below, and there'll be a link so that you can get access to the Yoga for a Healthy Core series so that you can start working on your core today. All right, for now, thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions at all about anything that I talked about in this video, please feel free to leave those in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. But hopefully I will see you on the mat for the Yoga for a Healthy Core series. Okay, until then, bye.